The checkout line at Garland's grocery moved slowly that Tuesday afternoon, the kind of slow that feels personal when you're watching the clock and counting minutes until school pickup. Loretta Marsh stood third in line with a basket that held exactly what she could afford that week: a box of oatmeal, 2 cans of diced tomatoes, a bunch of bananas starting to spot, a half-gallon of milk, and 1 small frozen pizza she had promised her son for Friday night. She had done the math 3 times in her head before she ever left the apartment. $31 and change. That was what her checking account held until Thursday, when the second half of her paycheck from the hospital laundry would clear. She shifted the basket from one arm to the other and watched the cashier, a teenager named Brianna, according to her name tag, scan items with the mechanical patience of someone still new to the job. The woman ahead of Loretta had coupons. A lot of them. Loretta exhaled slowly through her nose and studied the candy bar display she would not be buying. She was 38 years old. She had been a single mother for 4 of those years, since the night her husband Jerome drove home from a company dinner on a rainy highway outside Columbus and never made it. The settlement from the insurance had covered the funeral and 6 months of breathing room. After that, it was just her and her son Miles, who was 7 and believed deeply that superheroes were real, and that his mother knew everything. She knew almost nothing, most days. She knew how to stretch a rotisserie chicken into 3 dinners. She knew which pharmacy had the cheapest generic for Miles's inhaler. She knew the exact sound her car made when it was about to need something she couldn't pay for. But she did not know how to make $31 feel like enough, and she had mostly stopped trying to pretend otherwise. The woman with the coupons finished. Loretta stepped forward, set her basket on the belt, and began unloading. Brianna scanned each item without looking up. The oatmeal, the tomatoes, the bananas, the milk. Then she picked up the frozen pizza, and the scanner beeped twice and she frowned at the screen. "This one's ringing up weird," she said, mostly to herself. She tried again. Same double beep. She reached for her radio. "I just need a price check," she said. "I'm sure it's fine." Loretta knew it was fine. She had bought the same pizza a dozen times. But a price check meant waiting, and waiting meant the line behind her was growing. And she could already feel the eyes of the man directly behind her doing that thing people's eyes do when they're trying to seem patient but aren't. The price check took 4 minutes. The pizza was $4.89 ton, same as always. Brianna finished scanning and read out the total. $34.18. Loretta blinked. She pulled out her card anyway, because sometimes you do that. You pull out your card, and you swipe it and you hope the number you've been carrying in your head is wrong, that somehow the balance is higher than you think. It wasn't. The machine beeped, declined. "You want to try again?" Brianna asked, not unkindly. Loretta tried again. Same beep, same word on the little screen. The man behind her shifted his weight. She heard someone farther back in the line make a sound that wasn't quite a sigh but was aimed at her. "I'm sorry," Loretta said quietly, because she always apologized first. "I need to put something back." She looked at the belt, at her 7 items, and tried to figure out which one she could live without most. The pizza. It would have to be the pizza. Miles would be disappointed, but Miles was 7, and she could explain it in a way that wouldn't break either of them. She was practiced at that by now. "I'll take the pizza off," she told Brianna. She reached out to take it back, because she didn't want it just voided into a drawer somewhere. She wanted to carry it back to the freezer herself, to feel like she was the one making the choice, and not the one being turned away. Her hand closed around the box at the same moment. Another hand reached past her and placed a $20 bill flat on the counter. She turned around. The man standing behind her was maybe 10 years older than she was, somewhere in his late 40s, with a coat that had seen better winters, and the kind of tired that lives in the face rather than the eyes. He was holding a single paper bag already. He'd apparently finished his shopping while she was in line. In his other hand he held a small boy, maybe 4 or 5, who was examining a pack of gum near the register with extraordinary focus. "Please," the man said. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her the way someone looks at another person when they've been in the same room and they recognize each other without having met. "Let me." Loretta shook her head. "I can't accept that. Honestly, it's fine, I'll just." "It's $20, he said simply. "It's not a big thing." Then he glanced down at the boy beside him, and something moved across his face that she couldn't quite read. "And my son just pulled every single gum pack off that rack, and he's going to put them all back right now. So I'm going to be here a few minutes anyway." The boy looked up, clearly understanding he had just been caught, and began replacing the gum packs with great seriousness. Despite herself, Loretta almost smiled. Brianna was already running the 20. The new total came to $14 and some cents. Loretta paid the difference from her card without it declining this time, and she stood for a moment holding her grocery bag, not quite sure what to say to someone who had just done something that simple and that large at the same time. "Thank you," she finally managed. It didn't feel like enough. It never did. "My name's Alton," he said. He didn't extend his hand because his son was still solemnly replacing gum packs. "Alton Briggs." "Loretta." He nodded, like he was filing it away. "You come here often?" He said it flatly, then seemed to realize it sounded like a bad pickup line, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "I mean that literally. I moved to this neighborhood about 6 months ago. Still figuring out which stores are worth it. This one's decent," she said. "The produce is good on Thursdays. Avoid the rotisserie chicken on Mondays." "Good to know." His son had finished restoring the gum display and was now standing beside him, with his hands clasped behind his back, looking up at Loretta with the uncomplicated directness of young children. "I'm Danny," the boy said. She crouched slightly so she was closer to his eye level. "Hi, Danny. I'm Loretta. My dad says we have to be kind to people even when it's hard," Danny said as if reporting this as evidence. But this didn't look hard. Alton looked pained in a gentle way. "We talk about a lot of things in the car," he explained. Loretta stood back up. "He sounds like a good teacher," she said. She meant to say goodbye then and walk out, because that was the normal thing to do. But Danny had already grabbed the hem of her coat very gently, not pulling, just holding on the way small children touch things they find interesting. "Is your little boy going to be happy about the pizza?" he asked. She looked down at him. "How did you know I have a little boy?" Danny pointed at her basket, which she was still holding. Sitting on top was the box of frozen pizza, and on the box, there was a cartoon of a kid doing a thumbs up. "My son," she said, "is going to be very happy about the pizza." Danny nodded, satisfied, and let go of her coat. She walked out into the gray afternoon with her groceries and sat in her car for a moment before starting it. The parking lot was ordinary. The sky was the kind of pale white it got in October before the real cold came. She had $31.14 in her account, which was $4 less than she'd had when she walked in, which meant the next 4 days required careful arithmetic. But someone had noticed. In a grocery line. In a moment that could not have been more ordinary, someone had simply noticed. And it had cost her nothing except the weight of accepting it, which was the hardest part. She drove to school pickup and did not cry until she was in the parking lot waiting for Miles to come out. Miles came through the double doors in the uncontrolled way second graders move, backpack bouncing, looking for her car with the alert intensity of a small hawk. When he saw her, he waved with his whole arm. She wiped her face before he got in. "How was school?" she asked. "Mason threw up in art," Miles said, extremely pleased by this. "It was everywhere. Sounds eventful. Are we having the pizza Friday?" She pulled into traffic. "We're having the pizza Friday." He made a sound of pure satisfaction, and leaned back against his car seat and began narrating the details of Mason's misfortune with the thoroughness of a journalist. And Loretta listened and drove and felt, for the first time in a long while, like the day had ended on something solid. She thought about Alton Briggs a few times over the following week, the way you think about something that doesn't quite fit into a category you have. He wasn't a story she could tell cleanly. A stranger paid for her groceries. That was the whole of it. Except it wasn't, because Danny had been there. And Danny had asked about Miles and the pizza. And there was something in the specific gravity of a small child's attention that stayed with her. She stopped thinking about it when the week swallowed her back up. A double shift on Thursday when Sandra from the day crew called out sick. Miles developing a cough that was probably nothing but required 3 days of anxious monitoring. The car making it sound again, more insistently this time. She went back to Garland's the following Tuesday for the Thursday produce, which was still good even by Tuesday if you went early. She was in the vegetable section squeezing avocados, not to buy, just out of a habit she'd had since before the money got tight, when Danny appeared at the end of the aisle holding a bunch of celery with both hands like a torch. She almost didn't recognize him at first, out of context. Then he saw her, and his face opened up the way kids' faces do when they encounter someone from a different compartment of their life. "You're the pizza lady," he announced. Alton appeared behind him, reaching for the celery before Danny could use it for something inadvisable. He saw Loretta and paused for a second, recalibrating. "Hey," he said. "Loretta, hey." She gestured at Danny. "He remembered me. He remembers everything." Alton handed the celery to the cart. "He still talks about a bird he saw at the park in April. It had a red chest," Danny confirmed. "A robin," Loretta said. "Exactly a robin," Danny agreed as though she had passed a test. They ended up moving through the produce section at roughly the same pace, which turned into a loose, accidental conversation. The way conversations do when you're both handling vegetables. And there's no pressure to maintain eye contact. She learned that Alton worked as an HVAC technician for a company that mostly serviced commercial buildings. She learned that Danny's mother had left when Danny was not quite two. Not died, left, which was a different kind of loss and came with different paperwork. And that Alton had been doing this alone for 3 years. Which meant he had 2 years of practice on her. Does it get easier? She asked, not quite meaning to say it out loud. He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. The logistics get easier, he said finally. The feeling doesn't really go away, but it gets quieter. She nodded. That seemed about right. Danny had circled back and inserted himself between them, looking up at Loretta with the expression of a person about to ask something important. Does your boy like soccer? He asked. Miles? He likes everything that involves running. Danny looked up at his father. Dad. I heard you, Alton said. There's spaces in the Saturday clinic, Danny said to Loretta, explaining the conversation that was apparently happening between him and his father through some form of telepathy. At the community center. I go every week. Dad coaches sometimes. He paused. He's okay at it. Alton's expression held steady with some effort. I coach fine. You lost us 3 games, development league. Nobody's keeping score. I was keeping score, Danny said, and Loretta laughed out loud. A real laugh, not the careful kind she used at work, and it surprised her when it came out. She took down the name of the community center on her phone. More because refusing felt strange than because she thought it would actually happen. Single mothers in her position didn't generally have Saturday mornings free. Saturday mornings were laundry and overdue phone calls and the 3 weeks of second-grade homework she was perpetually catching Miles up on. She went the following Saturday anyway. The soccer clinic was exactly what it looked like from the outside. A gymnasium with nets set up at either end. A collection of children between 5 and 9 in various states of coordination and several adults trying to channel that energy in a direction that resembled a drill. Alton was on the far side of the gym with a group of the older kids, demonstrating something involving his feet that Danny kept interrupting with commentary. Miles lasted approximately 45 seconds before he was in the middle of it. She stood against the wall with a coffee she'd brought from home in a travel mug that said "World's Okayest Mom," which Miles had given her last Mother's Day from the school gift sale. One of the other parents, a woman named Christine who had the look of someone who had been attending this clinic long enough to have opinions about it, struck up a conversation that carried them through most of the hour. Afterward, in the parking lot, Miles was recounting something about a goal to Danny, who was listening with the same concentrated attention he'd given the robin. And Loretta found herself standing next to Alton while they waited for the kids to finish their debrief. Miles is a natural, Alton said. He runs at everything the same way, she said. Walls, feelings, other people, full speed. Alton smiled. It was a different smile than the one in the grocery store. Less careful, more settled. Danny's the same way except he talks through it all. He's narrating constantly. I don't know where he gets it. I do, she said, and then felt embarrassed, because she didn't actually know him well enough to say that, except that somehow she did. He didn't seem to mind. You want to get coffee sometime? He asked. Actual coffee, not from a thermos. The kids' place down on Mercer has an attached cafe. We could let them run it out while we sit there like people. She looked at him. He was watching Miles and Danny, not her, which somehow made it easier to answer. Yeah, she said. I think I'd like that. What happened over the next several months could not be called simple. Because nothing in their lives was simple. 2 single parents, 2 young boys. 2 separate histories of loss that sat differently, but took up the same amount of space. There were canceled plans when Danny got sick, and rescheduled ones when Loretta picked up extra shifts. There were dinners where both kids talked over each other so constantly that she and Alton communicated mostly through eye contact. There was one terrible evening when Miles had a bad dream and woke up crying and asking for his father. And Loretta sat on his floor in the dark for a long time without saying anything useful. And she called Alton at 11:30 just to hear another adult voice, and he stayed on the phone until Miles was asleep again. There was a Tuesday, 4 months in, when Alton showed up at her door with a toolbox and spent 3 hours fixing the thing her car had been doing. Because he'd asked about it enough times that he'd looked it up and it turned out to be something he could handle. She stood in the parking lot handing him things and watching him work, and when he was done, he refused anything except the coffee she made in her kitchen while the boys watched a movie in the living room. You didn't have to do that, she said, which was becoming a refrain between them. I was going to be around anyway, he said. You weren't though. You had a thing with Danny's school. He looked up from his coffee. I rescheduled it. She didn't know what to say. She looked at her hands around her mug and thought about what Christine had told her at the soccer clinic months ago, when she'd mentioned meeting Alton. That man showed up at every single one of Danny's school events the year his mother left. Every single one. Teachers still talk about it. She hadn't passed that along to Alton, because it felt like something he'd be embarrassed by. But she had thought about it a great deal. Alton, she said. Yeah, I don't know how to do this, whatever this is. I haven't done it in a long time and I wasn't expecting it. He was quiet for a moment, neither was I. He turned his coffee mug in a small circle on the counter. I'm not rushing anything. I just know that before you, Tuesdays felt like the longest day of the week. Now. I kind of across her own kitchen in the apartment she had made work out of necessity, and learned to make home out of stubbornness, with the sound of two boys arguing gently about something on the television in the other room, and thought that this was not the life she had planned. It was smaller in some ways and larger in others. It had cost her things she still wasn't done grieving. But it had also given her Miles, who ran at Walls. And it had given her this Tuesday, with a man who had rescheduled his afternoon so her car would work. I look forward to Tuesdays too, she said. Just so you know. In November Alton was offered a supervisory position at his company, a promotion he'd been passed over for twice before. He took Miles and Danny out for ice cream in the 40-degree weather to celebrate. Because Danny had decided that ice cream was a year-round institution. And Miles had agreed with a conviction that brooked no argument. She watched the four of them from across a sticky table in an ice cream shop that smelled like waffle cones and cleaning solution. And she thought about what it meant that she was counting herself as part of that four. She had started picking up additional shifts not because she had to, but because the hospital's billing department had posted an internal opening. Entry level. Data entry and claims processing. Fully on-site to start but with remote options after 6 months. And she wanted to be ready to apply when the next one came. The department head, a woman named Patricia, who had worked in healthcare administration for 20 years, had encouraged her 2 weeks earlier to put in for it. You've been doing this longer than you know, Patricia had said, which Loretta didn't fully understand until she realized she'd been quietly correcting billing errors on the laundry schedule for 3 years because the numbers were wrong and it bothered her. She applied in December. She got an interview in January. She got the job the same week Miles lost his first tooth and left a handwritten note for the tooth fairy, explaining that he knew she was his mom, but he wanted her to know he appreciated the effort. She cried for approximately 20 minutes after reading that note. The new job came with a modest pay increase, and, more than that, the sense that she was building something with a future in it, rather than just holding ground. She called her sister in Phoenix that night, the first real phone call they'd had in over a year. She told her about the job and about Miles and about Alton, who was hard to summarize but easy to be around. You sound different, her sister said. Different how? Like yourself, her sister said. Like you did before. Loretta thought about that for a long time after they hung up. She didn't think she was the same as before. Too much had changed. Too much had been remade from different materials. But she thought perhaps her sister meant something slightly different from what she said. Not that Loretta had gone back, but that something recognizable had returned. Some frequency that had gone quiet had started broadcasting again. She thought about a Tuesday grocery line, and $20 on a counter, and a small boy asking about the pizza. She thought about how the whole structure of her current life balanced, somehow, on that ordinary moment. How different the Tuesdays would look if she had simply let herself go invisible in that line, instead of a man with a tired coat and a kid who cataloged Robins choosing to see her. Miles turned 8 in March. They had a party in the community center gym. Her, Alton, Danny, Christine from the soccer clinic, 4 of Miles's school friends, and enough pizza to qualify as a public health event. Danny wore a paper crown he'd made himself, and insisted that Miles wear one too, which Miles accepted under mild protest, and then forgot about immediately. So the crown sat crooked on his head for 2 hours while he ran. She watched her son running and thought about Jerome. Not with the acute grief that used to hit her without warning, but with something steadier. He would have loved this. He would have been the loudest one there. He would have eaten 3 slices before anyone else had one. And then claimed he was pacing himself. She held that thought gently, the way you hold something you're not afraid of anymore. Alton came up beside her with 2 cans of soda and handed her one. 8 years old, he said, watching Miles attempt to explain the rules of a game he appeared to be inventing in real time. 8 years old, she agreed. You doing okay? She looked at him. She thought about the grocery line and the 4 days of arithmetic, and the car sound, and the long Tuesdays. She thought about the job application and the tooth fairy note and the phone call to Phoenix and the ice cream in 40-degree weather. Yeah, she said. I really am. He nodded once, like that was what he expected, and they stood there watching the kids run. And the gym was loud and warm, and outside it was still March, still cold, still the ordinary world where hard things happen to people who didn't deserve them, and sometimes, not always but sometimes, a stranger turned around in a grocery line and made the whole rest of the story possible.